Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Spark of Genius interview. And we are joined by none other than the first Canadian national champion for Flesh and Blood, Miss Yuki Lee Bender. Yuki, say hi to the fans.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be on the show.
And I am joined always as my kind of two pieces of the Spark of Genius family here with my co-caster, co-commentator, co-compatriot, Rob McAuley. Rob, say hi.
Hello. You can be Spark. I can be Genius. Okay.
Oh, it could be Spark. I could be Genius. That's going on. That's going on the shirt. That's going on the shirt.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so of course, kind of the same format as we did with Dante and some of the other interviews. We have some questions for Yuki, and then any kind of flavor text from Rob as it kind of goes down. So I just want to start with Canadian Nationals as the recording was last weekend. So we're recording this on I believe it was Wednesday today, whereas Nationals was the previous Saturday, Sunday, and by the time of this recording, all the deck lists would have been out, so you can check that out on fabtcg.com. There's an article, I believe, recapping the event by Alan Hale also, and so that information is available for people who are more interested in the event itself. But this one is going to talk a little bit about the event, but more so about Yuki's journey from cradle to grave here, from the very beginning to the very end, as they speak. So kind of starting out with a bit of the prep here, Yuki. How did you prepare for Nationals? Was it mostly like drafting practice, classic constructed? Did you kind of focus on one more than the other? How did you kind of approach that?
Yeah, so initially I mostly focused on the draft portion. I hadn't drafted Flesh and Blood before. I've drafted other games, primarily Magic the Gathering, so I was familiar with drafting, but I really wanted to get a feel for Flesh and Blood and what that was like. I also figured it made sense to do the Tails draft early on, since draft metagames are usually a little bit more stable, whereas coming out of a big chain ban, it was a really open meta, which was exciting, but it wouldn't surprise me. I felt like it wouldn't surprise me if a new deck came out, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So I figured that by waiting a little bit to see some of the early Nationals events and give the format a little bit of time to breathe, I would have a better idea of what to test CC in. Whereas if I did it from the start, I might be testing for a format that we're not even playing in.
Fair enough. No, that's fair. I like that you kind of let other people do a little bit of the legwork first, and not just because I know when I started, I was super high on like Lightning Lexi, and I'm like, this is the deck. Play like 2 or 3 weeks. Partner brought it into a tournament, got absolutely wrecked, decided that was not the play, and there's like 2 weeks left till National, so we're kind of scrambling a little bit. So I like that your approach was definitely to like focus on the more controllable part, because like draft's not going to change that like those strategies will still be good. And kind of rolling into the combined format of Nationals, did you ever put kind of more weight on one format to like carry you through, or you figure the play was kind of get better in both formats, try to kind of go like 2-1 2-1 2-1, or were you kind of focused more on draft is definitely going to carry me, I should definitely focus on it, and put CC to the side a little bit?
I definitely felt like the biggest edge to be gained was in draft. Being able to leverage some of my experience in draft from other games just felt like a big edge that I had. I know a lot of even the seasoned players in Flesh and Blood don't necessarily have a lot of experience drafting, so I felt like that was a bit of a leg up I could have, and I'd say that kind of most of my testing team was kind of on the same boat there, that we figured the draft portion would be really important, and it's half of the rounds that you play leading up to CC. I think the other contributing factor was, at the time early on in the CC meta, kind of post Road to Nationals, I had been on Prism all Road to National season, and Prism was looking to be just one of the best decks at the time. So I felt pretty comfortable with that, and I said, well, if Prism's good, why not just play it? I have lots of experience on it, and I can focus on draft and adjust if I need to adjust. Yeah. But so yeah, definitely a bit of a balanced approach, but I also recognize saw draft as like a big place to get an edge.
I also will add that it was hard to find packs to draft with, just because it was all first ed. So Unlimited only came out the day before Nationals. So I know from my own experience, buddies and I were trying to look for packs to draft with, and it was very difficult to find.
Yeah, luckily, I had ordered a couple boxes from Infinity that I hung on to draft,
Smart,
and so did a few of
smart.
my friends. Also, one of our local stores, Magic Stronghold, had boxes still available as well. But as you mentioned, the price tag was a little bit hefty, but
Yeah.
you
But
know,
it,
you
it
need to
paid
do
off
what
for you, so
you
that's all that matters. Don't worry about the
yeah.
cost. You just make it back later by winning, so don't worry about that. So kind of focusing on draft, as you said, can you tell us a little bit about like your draft prep? Um, as you already mentioned, it was a bit of a main struggle for a lot of the more seasoned players who really focused. This was the first major tournament, whereas the calling was either draft or CC, limited or CC. It wasn't both, and this was the first kind of set of tournaments that was. So based on that, I saw definitely a bit of struggle for the more seasoned players. So tell us maybe a bit about your prep for draft.
Yeah, so some of the questions I had about Flesh and Blood draft in general was sort of like, when do I need to lock in a class and decide? Because what's really different about Flesh and Blood draft is that you can, of course, only play cards in your class, or the generics or the talent cards. So you have to commit a little bit earlier. It's not like like in Magic the Gathering, you can pick one color and figure out your second color actually quite late.
Yeah.
And I was kind of discovered pretty quickly that that wasn't the case in Flesh and Blood. So that's sort of one thing that I was trying to get a feel for. And I think that usually you want to kind of figure it out around picks 5, 6, 7, kind of just before the wheel, and definitely have it locked in by the wheel. Yeah, in terms of prep, I tried to draft every hero just a little bit. I wanted to get a good feel for which commons were commons and rares, but especially commons were important in which decks. Especially identifying those cards that were flexible enough to be good in both Oldham and Briar, or both Lexi and Briar, or two of the heroes. And those were kind of the cards that I wanted to prioritize above everything else, because I knew that they would be really solid regardless of whatever deck I wound up in.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
That added flexibility definitely. Like some of those blue earth cards, or some of those kind of like peak high value, like the weave cards. I really like those kind of things. I'm sure you definitely put priority on picking your kind of key
Were
hero choice.
were there any class cards that you would have taken, like pick one or pick two? For example, maybe like a Bramble Spark or something.
A Bolton shot, maybe.
No, not really. Maybe if the pack was particularly weak, I might take a premium card like Bolton Shot or like Bramble Spark. But I really felt like the element cards were the harder ones to get, and I felt like a lot of the decks actually could be very strong just off the back of having good element cards, but the inverse wasn't true. Having the good class cards like Bramble Spark's great, but if you don't have the Earth cards to fuse it, it's pretty weak. I found that by getting those early, you kind of give yourself more flexibility to identify the open lane and then get those powerful cards later. And come pack 3, I found that often those cards are actually going a little bit later, because I think people are scrambling a little bit to fill out their elements. And at that point, you know exactly what class you want, and you probably have a pretty good idea of what kind of strategy you're drafting as well, and which pieces you're going to want the most.
Fair enough. Elements first, ask questions later. I like that approach. It's definitely something that I completely agree with you. On kind of flipping a little bit on the CC side, I know you mentioned that Prism. I mean, I know your Prism very well at this point, having faced it a fair number of times. So I'm quite aware on your love of Prism here. But did you test decks kind of other than Lexi, also like mainly against the most meta picks? Like you play a lot into Briar, maybe on to I guess Bravo would be another pick here, and a couple Chain Viscera. All the Rune Blades are always meta at some point, right? So did you kind of do something other Lexi, and then what kind of picks did you face against the most in your testing?
Yeah, so I primarily wanted to make sure that the Briar matchup was a good one for whatever deck I chose. So I pretty much started with Briar for any deck that I was testing, and if the matchup didn't feel at least, like close to 50-50, I pretty much discarded the deck. It was just very apparent how popular the deck is and also how powerful it was, and you're going to see it on top tables. So I really didn't want to be in a spot where I don't have a good plan into Briar. I did try Dash a little bit, thinking that the induction chambers kind of let you stop Briar from getting value out of the embodiments of Earth, but I wound up just feeling not that confident in Dash. The matchup was okay, but I think probably still Briar favored. And Bravo was never really a consideration for me. I don't really have the cards for it, and I expected a little bit more Bravo at the event than we actually saw, and I just wasn't too confident in my ability to learn the Bravo mirror in time. I only had a couple weeks, and I was actually quite busy with like work and report cards, and I know that the Bravo mirror is exactly the kind of matchup where it's a lot of small edges, and I wasn't confident I had enough time to really properly prepare that deck.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think there were only a handful of Bravos at the entire event. And looking at the article that went up on the FabTCG website, I think over 50% of the players were Briar, like 54% or something like that. I don't know if one of you can correct me, but I think I saw that. And I was like,
No,
wow,
that's
that was more than the U.S. Nationals, more than any other event, I believe.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, a function of the Canadian Nationals being kind of after a lot of the big ones. Everyone's kind of, if it broke, why fix it? That kind of makes sense. So kind of last question I have in the more preparation phase, how did you kind of approach building your Nationals, your Ice Lexi deck, your Nationals winning deck? Was it just kind of, was it expanded from a Blitz deck, as a lot of people like to do, like the core kind of cards, or did you start from scratch, or maybe it's like a little bit of both, or how did you kind of approach that?
Yeah, it actually did come from Blitz. I had been playing Lexi and Blitz in our locals just for fun. A nice Lexi build. I thought it seemed like a lot of fun, and I thought it would be pretty well positioned in Blitz, actually. Interestingly enough, I thought it'd be good into Ira, perhaps, because you could tax the Flick Flacks, but turns out that Ira is quite hard for Ice Lexi. She has just so many resources and so many tools to pressure, but I had a lot of fun playing Ice Lexi in Blitz, and I definitely felt like I learned a lot of the play patterns, and my list evolved quite rapidly playing that Blitz testing. I started out with a lot of generically powerful cards like Enlightened Strike and Command and Conquer, and I pretty quickly realized that while those cards give your deck a higher ceiling, they don't contribute to being consistent. And when you, in particular, if you draw them off 3 of a kind, it's just the last thing that you want to see. It doesn't pitch, it doesn't fuse, you can't play it. It's just really, really awkward. So yeah, I had a very good feel for kind of which types of cards I wanted, a lot of the key ratios, like how many blues I wanted, how many ice cards I wanted, how many arrows I wanted in my deck. I think it's all very, very tight in Lexi, and you really need to have the right numbers to be consistent. Mm-hmm. So I felt really well positioned to put together a deck, and it was definitely in many ways an expansion of my Blitz deck, but also some tweaks to specifically target Briar, like Sleep Dart, for example, is not a card that I was playing in Blitz, but seemed pretty obviously powerful into actually a lot of the field, not even just Briar, but especially Briar.
All right, fair enough. I mean, I think it's definitely I think your take on it was definitely a lot more aggressive maybe than people were expecting out of a typical, ice equals control. So I definitely like those kind of more aggressive picks out of that deck, particularly. And then jumping like right into the meta and the strategy in general, kind of what was your reading on the meta overall? I know you mentioned that, if it doesn't have at least 50-50 into Briar or something close to that, there's really no point taking it. And you were definitely correct on that read, as with most players wanting to go Briar anyways. Did you kind of look at prior national calling events? Was it like kind of a local meta perspective, and how did that kind of impact your final deck choice and the cards you selected?
Yeah, so I mostly based it off the previous callings. The callings and the nationals, but especially the nationals. I figured people would be looking to those events as they were kind of the biggest events around, and I expected kind of similar breakdowns, so a lot of Briar, especially in the top tables, and perhaps some Bravo as well. But as we mentioned earlier, Bravo was a little bit underrepresented. Mm-hmm. And more or less, I did end up being right, especially later into the event. But in the early rounds, I did face a a Kano in there, and there was an Oldheim that's snuck into top 8 that I also had to fight in Swiss, and that is a really tough matchup.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely had to be prepared for a wider field, and didn't get a chance to test against some of the other, the Dashes and Dorinthias of the world. I had a couple games under my belt and had a few from Blitz, and felt like I probably have more experience than they would in the matchup at least, but I definitely didn't have time to test it extensively. So.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because I think we didn't see many of those at all, right? Maybe not even a single Dorinthia that I can think of, at least.
I couldn't remember a single one, but
yeah,
they're probably more afraid of you than you are of them. So what does it matter, right?
And I was pretty sure that it's a positive matchup anyways. Just Dorinthia really wants to keep her hand, like maybe block with one card, and Ice Lexi is all about not letting you do that. So yeah, overall I wasn't too worried, and I felt like, like Dash ended up being a somewhat similar matchup to Bravo, where they might try and fatigue you and you need to have a plan for that. So I kind of approached it as, an anti-aggro build and then a more anti-control build, and just pivoting between those.
Oh, that makes sense. How did you kind of come to the realization that Lexi was going to be your hero of choice, and kind of why more so the Ice Lexi and not like the Lightning build with Buzz Bolts and the more hyper, so to speak, hyper aggro kind of go again Lightning Lexi builds?
Yeah, I had actually started out testing Lightning Lexi, much like you, thinking that it was great. And what I realized about the deck is I felt like Lightning Lexi could beat just about anybody and also lose to just about anybody, and felt a little out of my control. Like when you draw hot, it's amazing. You just steamroll people, and then sometimes you don't, and you really can't block very well, and your only real plan is to attack, so you don't get that much agency over the game, and I didn't really like that about that deck. But Ice Lexi I pretty much settled on, or I was fairly confident I would play almost as soon as I saw the Briar deck in UK Nats. As soon as I saw it play and I saw some of the deck lists, I was like, well, I already know that this Ice Lexi build has really good matchup into Briar based on the Blitz games that I've played. And just so many of the cards are obviously powerful. I mean, the deck is playing almost all reds, and you're giving them Frostbites. Frostlock is an incredible tool against them, turns off almost their entire deck. So, having on hit take an extra turn is pretty darn good on hit. So yeah, I pretty much knew right away. And the big question for me was Ice Lexi going to be the way to go, or was it going to be just joining the Briars? But the more that I tested the Briar matchup, the more that I felt very, very confident. I think between testing and the actual games in the event, I'm probably something like 25-1 against Briar. Almost impossible to lose. I shouldn't say impossible to lose. Like, a lot of the games are close.
I'm sure you could
feel like you're in control of the game.
Yeah.
Even though you're trading HP, or life points, it's all kind of on your terms, and you have a lot of agency, which is nice.
Yeah. With that kind of win rate, I understand completely. Like 96% or something. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So,
yeah. What about the mirror? Have you prepared a bit for the mirror as well?
Not so much. I wasn't expecting too many other Ice Lexis, and was just having trouble finding the time to get somebody to pilot it against me. I did actually end up facing Ice Lexi in day one, and ended up dropping that match. I made some pretty poor plays. It was the last match of the day, and I think I was a little
tired,
a little tired, a little overly relaxed. I really didn't sleep well the first night.
Tell me about it.
Time change was.
You guys traveled from BC,
yeah.
DST to EST,
yeah. So by the time I got to the last round, I was just fried. I think I got to a point where I could have played a Lake Frigid, and I chose not to. And then, of course, I didn't draw the ice card for it the next turn. And then my opponent got a Lake Frigid, and I had to block with my New Horizon. And then I forgot that I didn't have New Horizons, so I put a Lightning Press in my arsenal, which is terrible.
Oh, that hurts my soul a little bit. Okay.
And I ended up having to like have a judge call and say, "Can I Lightning Press their attack after I've taken damage?" And I had to pitch a card to do it. Like, it just was not good.
Really I wish I could see that judge call. That would have been the most confused looking judge on your No, it's
I explained to them, I explained to them, like, I made a very silly play.
Nope, that's fair. I guess the last question I have before we kind of dive into the event a little bit more is, I know kind of teching for decks is definitely, I mean, there was Chain and Monarch, which seemed like it could kind of beat everything and has at least 50-50 into anything, but teching for decks was definitely a bit more prevalent here. So were there any, you mentioned, I know you teched specifically for Briar and a little bit of Bravo. You didn't even see a lot of Bravo. Did you find there were like really hard matchups when you were testing, and were there matchups where you're just like, all right, if I see this here, I'm just taking the L, I'm just going to move on? Probably not a lot of them. Was there anything that kind of came up when you were testing?
Yeah, I wound up feeling like the deck was actually quite well positioned against pretty much any of the aggro decks. Chain is a lot closer than Briar. He tends to have more resources, but it still felt totally reasonable, either 50-50 or possibly slightly Lexi favored. Viserai also felt like a pretty positive matchup. And I felt very confident about my plan into Bravo. Like, I think Bravo can definitely give you a run for your money and take games off you, but I felt like the plan of setting up 6-card hands and going wide or just going very, very tall was very effective into Bravo. And pretty much all the control strategies. Trying to fatigue and ice Lexi when they, have, I was playing 6 Weave Ices, or had access to 6 Weave Ices in the board, and I could just go really tall. And when you just keep going 12 dominate, it's hard to do a lot about it. You kind of run out of D-reacts, and your defense reactions get really, really bad too when you give them Frostbites. It turns it from a great card into a pretty actively terrible card. So
I mean, unmovable going from 3 to 4 would be pretty bad.
Or like sinks going up to 1, it's suddenly just,
what's the point anymore?
Worse. Yeah, exactly.
You might as well block with 2 cards for 6 at that, unless you have dominant. But it's like
so I think that it's really not a deck that you can fatigue. The big exception being if you're old time. If you're old time, you just smash Ice Lexi. I had played 1 or 2 games leading up to the event against old time, and I went, I don't know how to deal with this matchup. I don't know if it's even solvable. Like, it felt so bad. And I said, I don't think there's going to be that much old time, so maybe I just hope that I just don't play against it. And that was kind of the route that I took. Funny enough, I did end up playing it in Swiss, and I almost played it in top 8 as well. So could have been a little bit of a dangerous play there, but it wound up working out in the end.
No, fair enough. Rolling right into the main event here, as you kind of alluding to some of the possible and the actual matches here. So tell us kind of about your Swiss in day 1, your CC, your draft pod. How do you feel that you performed, I guess, in more respect to piloting your CC deck, and then your kind of maybe draft picks, maybe a couple key ones that you felt like you were really kind of quite strong and quite confident in? And then maybe some, if you had a memorable match in one of your day 1s. The Lightning Press was fantastic, don't get me wrong, but maybe if you have one for like, actually Ice Fan and took this person's hand and just turned around the match just like that, something like that. So if you have anything in mind.
Yeah, for sure. So my day 1 matches, I faced a Bravo that was pretty much exactly what I tested. I felt quite good about the matchup. I did face a Kano in round 2, who I wasn't particularly prepared for. I think if you have some Arcane Barrier, it can be pretty good. And I think if you draw the right cards, it can still be reasonable. But I was just drawing Bolton shots, and Kano didn't really care that I was attacking him for 15. He just was happy to take it and burn back
for more.
So. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't really a winning matchup. After that, I faced a Briar, and that pretty much went exactly as planned. It did give me a little bit of a hiccup because they had a very, very aggressive start, and I think they got in for 7 damage on turn 1 and made 2 embodiments, which is never where you want to be. But I did manage to eventually get the tempo back and get them on the back foot and round that out. Going into the draft pod, my strategy was just to draft whatever was open for my seed. I think that that's the most important thing in this format, is because usually there'll be 3 of a hero, 3 of another hero, and 2 of the last one. And I've found that if you can position yourself to be in whatever class there's 2 of, you usually had a really good deck. That being said, I did have a slight favoring of either Briar or Oldhim. I do think the Lexi beating Oldhim can be a little bit of a tough matchup, but it's doable. But funny enough, I actually wound up drafting Lexi. I started out with some very strong lightning cards, Entwined Lightning, red Entwined Lightning, red Lightning Surge. I think I had a red Electrify in there, so I was pretty committed to lightning. And I was thinking I would draft Briar, but it just completely dried up. There was, like multiple Briar commons missing as early as picks like 5 or 6, and it was pretty clear that I should be in Lexi. It turned out there was only 2 Lexi drafters in the whole pod, and one of them switched quite late into the deck, so I definitely got the lion's share of the cards, and I felt pretty great about my deck going in. I did pick up enough of the kind of Weave Ices or Weave Lightnings or the pumps to be able to go over top of Bravo, and that's kind of exactly how it played out. My first 2 rounds were against Briars. I pretty much just raced them. My deck was very, very aggressive. I think I killed both Briars by turn 3. Bit of a lightning round. I wasn't blocking much. They weren't blocking much.
Talk about speed right there. All right, fair enough.
Yeah, totally. And then I faced a pretty solid Oldhim in the last round. His deck was quite good. I did manage to pull really far ahead by having a big go wide turn off an Electrify. I think I attacked for 4 or 5, like 4 times in the turn. And his hand was not set up for it. He had a Turn Timber in hand, so he used that on the first attack. Then he blocked, I think he blocked a Ball Lightning with another attack, and then he was stuck with this Summerwood Shelter in hand that is like a red Summerwood Shelter, which is great, but it doesn't work against go wide, right?
No.
And then he, I think thinking it was all go wide, he decided to deep blue it away and swing his hammer at me, and then I started going tall with Dominating. I was like, oh my goodness. So so the first draft pod went really well for me. I went out at 3-0 and I was feeling great after it.
Oh, fair enough.
From there, my other CC rounds weren't, they were quite tough. I lost against Oldhim in round 7. Not a particularly close game. I played Jay, one of my primary testing partners, in round 8, who was on Briar, and that was definitely my hardest Briar matchup of the day. Just because he had experience in the matchup, he knew what my deck was doing, and I think that there's definitely some sideboarding that Briar can do that's maybe not intuitive, but quite important in the matchup.
Yep.
And he was quite aware of that, which made it a tough matchup. But I ended up going over the top of him by presenting a Frostlock for 7 and forcing him to throw his equipment and a card to block it, because you can't get hit by that card. And then I had the Lightning Press to go over the top. And
the Lightning Press. I'm sure he loves that card with a burning passion. Oh, the Lightning Press. Well, that's okay.
Yeah, it really was just so powerful. Lightning Press is an amazing card, especially with New Horizon. One of my favorite things is just to stick it in Arsenal and have it face up, and your opponent's sort of like, well, do I overblock and just have you not use it, or do I block properly and then you just Lightning Press? So
just as effective as like fusing with it too. It's like, I'll fuse with this Lightning Press. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, totally.
Overblock, and then I'll just Arsenal this for later.
Yeah. You can really you have a lot of flexibility. I'd say that kind of characterizes the deck in general. Mm-hmm. And then my last round was against Ice Lexi Mirror. I kind of talked about that game already.
The Lightning Press,
very well.
the tired Lightning Press in the Arsenal, unfortunately. The unplanned. It's fair.
And but in a way, I think it was kind of good that happened. I realized that was like a bit of a leak in my game that I needed to address. And going into day 2, I felt really focused. And in top 8, I was like, I'm just gonna go step by step, really make sure that I'm playing as clean as I can. And I don't want to be, if I lose, I want it to be because I lost, not because I did something stupid.
That's
after a
fair.
good night's rest as well, right?
Yeah, I slept much better the second night, probably because I
Yeah.
was so tired from the first day.
Oh
And
man.
yeah, I felt much better actually.
I was playing side events and I was tired, so
Can only imagine,
Yeah.
huh? No, that's
I can only
fair.
imagine. Yep.
Well, let's like roll right into day two. I mean, you're definitely we're all kind of exhausted here. So day two starts off as the draft pod first, and then it would be a cut to top eight. Well, everyone who scrubbed out was in ProQuest, and then so we're just looking at kind of the top 24 draft pod. What did you pick? How did the games go? Again, anything memorable? Who did you verse? Kind of the rundown of what you did for the first draft pod.
Yeah, so going into that day, I was 6-3, which was not where I wanted to be. My goal was to be 7-2 after the first day because then you can 2-1 the second draft. You pretty much needed to be X-3. There's a possibility of getting in at X-4, but only if your breakers were very, very good. So I felt pretty confident being able to 2-1 a draft, but being able to 3-0 a draft is always a little bit tough. You kind of need to have one of the best decks at the table. Another thing that was unfortunate is that I realized going in that there was quite a few players from BC in my draft pod, all in the same position. So my testing partner Jay was in my draft pod, and so was Donghee from BC, and it was a little bit of it was unfortunate. I wish that some of them could have been in the other pod, and that way more of us would have had a shot. But
Yeah.
It is what it is, and that's how it broke.
Yeah.
Going into the draft, I actually don't remember my pack one pick one. I believe it was another lightning card. And then in pack two, I was past a honing hood, and the pack was actually quite weak. So I did end up picking up the honing hood. I think it's really powerful. And I guess Rob asked if I would pick class cards, and that's maybe the one exception. The class equipment, especially the honing hood and the Sutcliffes, I think are just so strong that you should pick them early. So I was pretty happy to do that. And from that point on, I just kind of drafted a bit of lightning, and then I got past a late weave ice. I think I got past a red weave ice pick 5 or something absurd.
Nice.
And
that's value right there.
Yeah, exactly. And I was, I'm definitely playing Lexi. At that point, I was like, I'm either Briar or Lexi, kind of leaning towards Lexi, and I see the Weave Ice, and it's like, okay, I know what to do. I was basically wheeling everything, and it became very apparent going through that draft that I was the only Lexi drafter at the table. I had more overflexes than I could play. I had, 40 playable cards. I could switch between Ice and Lightning depending on if I was playing against Oldham or Briar.
That's the dream.
It's the best deck I've ever drafted by far, and it's just because I was the only Lexi. In fact, my deck was so strong that my pack 3 pick 1, I just ended up taking a red Summerwood Shelter because I didn't really want to play against the card, and I already knew I could wheel whatever card I wanted from the pack anyways, so there was really no point in...
You're so far ahead, you're just kind of taking stuff away from everyone else.
Hate drafting and pick one, pack 3, hate drafting.
Not really something I'd advise.
Oh my god.
Yeah, my deck was... I already looked at my deck and I'm like, I could play this and be happy with it, so...
Yeah.
There wasn't anything in there that I felt like I really needed, so I felt like denying the Summerwood Shelter was probably more important, especially because I had to win out, so I knew that I would have to beat that card at some point. So
no, that's fair. So obviously you 3-0'd. I mean that's very clear. There could only be kind of 1 3-0 in each pod, so you ended up 3-0 the pod, and then you're landing at 9-3. So at 9-3, I believe you were seed 6. if I recall. I'm not 100% sure, but I think you were.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Because Dante was seed 3 and I played against him, so that sounds right.
Right. So you did come out as one of 2 BC players. Luckily, Oliver was at least in one of the other pods, and he managed to. I think he 2-1 or 3-0'd. I wasn't really sure, but he was actually, I think, seed 4-5. One of those two. So at least we got 2 BC players in there. So you didn't knock out all of them with one bowling ball and all the pins go down at least. So you managed to knock your testing partner out at 9th and come into top 8. And then let's kind of just go right into top 8. I mean, obviously you're coming in off a 3-0 draft. You got to be feeling pretty confident at this point. I mean, you're looking at the top 8. You had 5 Briars, 5 Briars, a Chain, a Lexi, and an Oldhim, if I recall correctly. Right.
Yeah.
So you being the only Ice Lexi, so you didn't have to play the mirror again. So that was kind of nice, right? So tell us about kind of making. How do you feel making top 8? Because that's already a massive accomplishment in my eyes, at least a very major tournament. And then, your top 8 matches, your round 1 opponent, memorable matches, what kind of sacrifice you made to the gem gods to dodge Demos on Oldhim for the second time.
I was going to say Demos on Oldhim,
Yeah, so that was the nightmare, was that in the semis, if Demos won and I won, I would be playing him on Oldhim, and I knew that was close to unwinnable for me. It felt like I would do my best, but I hadn't really discovered secret tech between yesterday and this day, especially playing the same list. So I was quite worried about that, but I decided to just focus on my current opponent, which was Dante, and of course, very established player. I was mostly just really excited to be in the top 8, and I wanted to see how well I could do. And I felt like I was overall really well positioned, and if things went the right way, I could definitely see a path to me winning the event, is what I felt like. So I was really, really focused. And I tried to play very slow, not slow, but very intentionally, and just announce all of my triggers, make sure I'm very okay, you take damage, and then this triggers, and then this triggers, and then at the start of my turn, I'm accounting for my tunic, I'm not forgetting things, and I played, overall, I think I played really well. I did miss a couple remorseless triggers, I think 1 in 2 different games. It's a hard one to remember. But other than that, I think I played pretty solid. I drew very, very well against Dante, 3 of a kinds, and just able to kind of play that aggressive plan where I'm pressuring him and racing him, but also disrupting and keeping him from getting too many embodiments of Earth where he can just start blocking arrows with 1 card. So I was able to prevent that and kind of catch him off guard a little bit with Frost Bites locking up his tunic and making it really, really awkward for him to use, and managed to get the win there. After playing Dante, I was actually watching Demos and Isaac play. Quite invested in their game. Actually, never been so invested in another person's game before.
We got a little flag, a little face paint, a little Demos flag. Oh, sorry, not a Demos flag, an anti-Demos flag in the back.
Yeah, so they were both. It had eventually gotten to the point. I had been watching before this, but it eventually got to the point where I think they both had only 4 cards left. Isaac had been at 28, but been whittled down very, very low, and Demos was also at 1. I think they were both at 1 actually, and Isaac had done a really excellent job of stacking his deck, having the Sting ball combo, but Demos was just disrupting him left and right. Now's the turn, and then Old put those cards on the bottom, and then he has to set it back up, and so it was really intense, and it came right down to the wire. And I was really happy when Isaac managed to just scrape by for a win. I thought he was done for a moment there, but it's just how it happened.
Right. No, that's fair. So Isaac wins that one. You're of course paired with him going into another Briar. How did you feel about any different than the Dante game, or was it kind of another kind of basic I beat you, I'm Ice Lexi, you're Briar?
It was mostly pretty straightforward. I felt like it really went my way again. actually both Dante and Isaac and actually Sean in the finals also, I think they all took the same line of pitching quite aggressively to make a rune chant on turn one and filter their hands. I think they pitched like a red and a yellow or two reds. And I just don't think that's something that you can really be affording to do in the matchup, because it lets me activate Voltaire and get an arrow, and then I'm starting with a 5-card hand.
Yeah.
Whereas it's way too dangerous to do it if they just don't attack, or maybe they do attack and force through some damage because I don't block that well.
Yeah.
So I just felt like I was starting way ahead, which was nice. And then there was a little bit of a potential turning point where I was quite nervous. I had a 3 of a kind turn where I had played a red Icequake from hand and I had a blue Icequake in my arsenal. I was fairly low. I think I was at 12 and he was at 12, something like that. We were both quite low, but I had tempo and I had 3 of a kind, so I was feeling good, but I didn't have any arrows. So I play 3 of a kind and I'm just drawing my cards one by one. And the first one's a blue ice card, which is not what I want because I already have a blue ice card. Draw another one. It's also a blue ice card. I'm going, oh man, is this going to be like the US? Yeah, exactly.
Can't happen again. Not again.
Yeah, I was just like, is this how it's going to go? Like, I think I spot here if I miss. But luckily the last one was a yellow chilling ice vein. And I was still pretty nervous because I could pump up the yellow chilling ice vein to 8 between the 2 ice quakes, and that's not bad, but it's not what you're hoping for off a 3 of a kind turn. So I was trying to figure out what to do, and the line I ended up picking that I was really happy with was I put chilling ice vein in, but I gave it go again so that Isaac would think that I had more arrows coming. And the way Ice Lexi works is you usually want to have to block the later attacks, because as you fuse, all this effects stack up and the later attacks are more dangerous than the early attacks. So we ended up blocking with 1 card, perhaps worried about taking the full 8 damage right off the bat. But he only blocked with 1 card. And what I ended up doing was I had 2 resources floating and 2 blue ice cards in hand and a pulse in hand, so I just wound up pitching my whole hand to into shock charmers and activating it 4 times. And on a chilling ice vein, that's pretty good. I ended up taking his whole hand, giving him 2 frostbites. He had to pass the turn, and he was down at 2, and I had a pulse in my arsenal, so that pretty much locked up the game. But
awesome! Wow.
Yeah, I was happy for my my mind game there.
Yeah.
Not letting him know that I had actually whiffed.
Those are the most rewarding times when you play Fab. It's the mind games. Yeah.
And I feel like there's quite a bit of it with Lexi. Like, so sometimes you give go again because you're actually not sure if you're going to attack again, but sometimes you can also just threaten to attack again, even though you maybe can't.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
Yeah.
Right. No, fair enough. I remember when I saw that play. The side, I just thought it was like, oh no, it's doomed. Oh, it's not doomed. It's actually going the other way. But no, that was definitely a very nice bluff. I too am a big bluff guy, so I could appreciate a good bluff when I see one. So that was very nice. And then seeing Sean in the finals, another Briar player, kind of looked like I think it was some back and forth, and then you kind of just took control. I mean, as you said, trading a little bit of life for some tempo would really flipping for frostbites. It kind of looked like more of the same, like clockwork, and then you took control, didn't let go, and that was it. You were the new Canadian champion, and I'm not gonna spoil the gold foil card because I have that on a YouTube short for later. But of course, getting the gold foil, getting the mat, the Art of War mat, getting the trophy, and then a little bit of money, just a tad, just a little bit of money to go with your
pays for the flight.
Victory. Pays for a flight, pays for a couple others if you want to go on, your next big event, that kind of thing. So it kind of all comes together, and that's kind of wrapping up here at Postnat. So now, as the proud owner of a shiny new PTI, very well earned. What do you think you're gonna kind of use it for, like a Pro Tour, Worlds? What's kind of the next big event you're looking forward to? I mean, I don't really, skirmish is a skirmish, but I'm talking about more like an invitational or that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the skirmish season I think will be fun, and especially looking forward to the draft in it. But in terms of the big events, I'm curious to get more details from LSS about the Pro Tour and about Worlds. Feels pretty hard to turn down going to Worlds. I think it's just going to be such an incredible event. Although I would also like to be on the Pro Tour, so I don't know how that's going to happen. I would have to get a second invite somehow, and I don't know how much time I'm going to have to travel. But if I could swing that, that'd be awesome. And if I can't, I'd be very happy going to Worlds. I think it'll be an incredible experience.
You can't disappoint your newfound fans. You had a bit of a fan club walking around on day one, just watching your matches here. So I mean, you got to do it for the gram. You know, you got to do it for the people. So that's okay. That makes sense. I do like Worlds will be. I think they announced they're looking at like in November 2022 or something. So hopefully there's kind of more callings. I guess would be the big way to get the PTIs would be, I guess, top 8ing a calling would be a big one. I guess all the callings usually have pro quests there, so I feel like that'll be like the next 2022 milestone, so to speak. But that's fair. So any last kind of thing, any shouts you want to give to the community, people, testing partners, whoever? Is there any shouts you'd like to give?
Yeah, a few of them. I think the whole Canadian Fab community is pretty amazing. I had such a good time at that event. It was awesome. People were so friendly. There's a lot of people that maybe I knew that I'd talked to a little bit on Discord, and it was nice to put a name and a face together. And some people I didn't know, and they were still super, super friendly. So it was just an awesome event. Really nice to see people. I'm looking forward to the next time we can all come together. I also want to shout out the local BC community, especially, Eric for organizing events and Dylan for just kind of bringing Fab to BC in a lot of ways. I don't know that I would have grabbed onto the game and gotten into it the same way if we didn't have the local scene to back it up. And then finally, shout outs to Mateo Smith and Tsubasa J. Ueda, who were some of my primary testing partners. A bit unfortunate, I did have to take two wins from Jay there, but at least one of us made it into the top 8, and it was a good result in the end. So
at least he lost to the champion. He lost to the champion.
He lost to the champion.
At that point, it's okay.
I feel bad.
Yeah, that's what he said. He said, "I would have been mad at you
if you didn't win,
but you won, so it's acceptable." Is how he put it.
Yeah, I could see that. That actually makes a whole lot of sense now. Picturing it. But at least you were able to kind of bring it home, bring it back to the West Coast, so to speak. So that's kind of nice. The weather's better out here, anyways.
Ontario will take it another time.
Okay.
We'll take the L this time, and we'll plan better.
You could take the L for now. That's all that matters. So finally, kind of what gold foil did you end up? Wait, don't answer that. You gotta check out Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood YouTube for the unveiling short. I had to say it. Yuki, pleasure having you on the show. I'm sure we're gonna see you probably fairly soon. You just gotta win a couple more events. That's why I tell everybody, the more you win, the more we want to have you. We give you stuff, kinda, sorta. It's more like exposure, but don't worry about it. One day, maybe exposure graduates. So pleasure having you on the show. For everyone watching, this will be airing on YouTube and Spotify, so you can check out Yuki's kind of monologue of the Canadian Flesh and Blood champion. So congratulations again, Yuki. It was an honor watching you take that trophy. And then from myself and Rob at Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood, see you guys next time.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.